create and play animation in Photoshop. Animation. This is the appearance of movement. An animation from Photoshop is a quick display of an image sequence that gives the illusion of motion. When we talk about animation, we also talk about frames. Frames are the individual images that are used in an animation. And oftentimes we'll talk about frame rate, the number of frames per second. Let's open up the timeline panel again and take a look at how we can achieve an animation in Photoshop. So under the window menu, and I'm looking for the timeline panel. Now you also can go to your motion workspace. Remember, we're working under Essentials. Essentials is sort of the default. We have some other workspaces that Photoshop has offered us, and we can also create a new workspace for the arrangement of the panels that we like. So if I go to motion here, some of these things will change, but the one thing that does pop up down here at the bottom is timeline. So whether you use Essentials and open timeline through the window menu, or go to your motion workspace, either way you'll get this timeline. So I can float it. Typically you're going to attach it here to the bottom, and that's what I'm going to do. So the timeline panel, this allows us to now work with the animation. And remember, the timeline panel works in both animation and video. We're working with just animation right now. So we need to place images on layers in a file, because our animation is going to work by going from layer to layer to layer. So you can sort of think of each one of those images in that sequence that gives the illusion of motion for your animation is basically your layers. So let's go ahead and make a couple of changes here. I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'll call this red, because what I'm going to do is change this yellow flower to red. Okay, so how do I do that? Well, I need to select based on the color. So I can do a lot of different things here. I could actually go under my color range and try to select the yellow here, and I can increase the fuzziness to try to get all of my yellow. Okay, so that's one way. If I click OK, you can see my selection. Control D to deselect. We can try our quick selection tool and just see what happens when we start dragging here. And because I have the plus icon up here, the add to quick selection, I can just keep clicking and it will add to. All right, so I'm not going to be totally perfect with this. So this is one way. Now I could do Control D to deselect. I could make a selection based on my channels. So you notice that if I go to red, very much stands out. Green, semi, blue, I don't see it. So if I go to my red channel actually and make a selection based on this, I might be a little bit more successful. And remember, we also have our refine edge. This brings up our box to let us grow the selection and allows us to see what's happening. So let's do a smart radius here. And we're going to increase this. Do you see how now I'm getting out to the edges a little bit? Remember, I can smooth it out if I think it's too tight. I can feather this. Do you see how that's becoming a bit blurry? And I can shift the edge to make it grow or constrain. Output to a selection. And I can view this with an overlay. Remember all these different ways that I can work with this depending on how you'd like. I can see the marching ants. Okay, I'm going to go to overlay for a moment because I want to work a little bit more on increasing this radius. Now I have this refine radius tool, so I can select some of this area here to try to define this edge. We'll see what this does. little bit. Let's get a little bit in here. Remember, this tool, Photoshop, is doing the work for me. Pretty pleased with this area. So it's kind of in here that we need to work a little bit more on to see if we can't find this edge. And because I'm not starting with the selection there, it's going to have a hard time filling it. A little bit it did. Let's do a little bit more in here. So right now Photoshop is trying to be smart about it. And I can click OK and kind of see what I've got. If I don't like this, remember I can keep working and adding this. So I'm going to add a little bit more here. And we can preview this to look at how this is working. A little bit more there. Okay, go back to the red, go back to the refine edge, and let's play with the radius here just a little bit more, see if we can't get a little bit more of this area in here. Now, because I'm spending this much time with this selection, it would be in my best interest to save this selection. All right, so I click OK, go back to my composite so I see everything. I'm going to go up here and save selection. We can also save it down here, remember, in an alpha channel. And so I can do it either way. We can fill this with white. I'm gonna go back up to here and do it this way. You'll notice that here's my new channel. I could have filled it with white on my newly created channel for my selection as well. And so now I can, with this selection, I can then do some colorization. I can either apply an adjustment on this, or I can actually go ahead and color it by going under Image and Adjustments. Remember, that's permanent. So let's go here and change that hue and saturation. Okay, maybe we'll go with a bit more orange. I can saturate it, desaturate it. Colorize, remember, we can also colorize it. So all kinds of effects and ways that you can do this. So now if we take this off, basically I can just go to an adjustment layer to make this animation. So I have my layers that I want, so I'm ready with that. I'm hiding everything except for my starting layer. I'm going to go down to my timeline. And down in the timeline, I need to make a new layer. I'm going to create a frame animation right here. When I do that, I get a frame. And remember, a frame is the individual image that's used in my animation. Now, if I want to see this in a little bit more larger format, I can go ahead and get to my animation panel options, increase that thumbnail view so you can see it a little bit better. Now, it's really important how we do this next step, because we have to duplicate the current frame before we move on and make our change. Because if I make my change right now, it's going to be on my first frame. So you always sort of work ahead, make a copy, then do your alterations. So make it a new copy. So now I have 2 frames, and now I turn on my adjustments, and you can see how that affected it. Now I could make another new frame, and I could turn that off. Okay, so now I have the sequence here. If I play it, you can see how it goes fairly quickly. We'll talk about the frame delay and some tweening effects in the next recording. That's the way I can create a new animation. I'm making a new frame and doing some alterations. And I can continue to do that. Now, moving and deleting frames. If I want to delete a frame, say I don't want this ending yellow because I'm going to end up looping this, I can have that frame be selected, and I can either drag it to the trash, click the trash. If I want to move it, I can just click and drag it to a new location. If I want to select multiple frames, I can shift click if they're continuous, or if they are non-continuous, I can hold down the command key and click non-sequential frames. So let's go ahead and delete this one. Yes, I do. Now, as far as looping the animation, we can set the number of times that this animation will play. And so it's the looping list arrow here. By default, it has once. I can do it 3 times, forever, which means it's in an endless loop, or in the other, it brings up the set loop count dialog box. And here I can enter the number of loops I want, the number of times it's going to loop. Okay, so if we want to just loop this now, say forever, and then when I play it, you know, it's going to loop. Now I'm getting a weird effect here because it's very quick. I haven't set my frame delay yet. So like I just did, I can preview this animation, and I am going to change this. We'll talk about this in a moment, but we can change our delay so it's maybe 0.2 seconds. And remember, a second is a long time. That's still kind of fast. So I'm holding shift to get both of these, and I'm using the drop down. Let's do 0.5 seconds. Not so bad. We'll do a tweening effect in a moment. So I can preview it using the play button right here. I can also preview the optimized image in a browser by going under File, and we're looking for the Save for Web. Older versions will have Save for Devices or Save for Web here. We have to go to Export and Save for Web, the legacy, which means old. And here I can potentially optimize it if I wanted to see how I can best shrink my file size. But I can also then preview it right here. And we can set what kind of browser you're going to preview it in. Okay, so there's the preview. In order for the animation to work, it needs to be a GIF. Animations are supported in the GIF format, not the JPEG. So my JPEG, if I preview right now, I'm not going to see any animation happen. So instead, what we want to do is change this to a GIF. And at the moment, it's going down to 8 colors. Let's have this be at the max of 256 colors. Looks fairly realistic. And now let's preview it. And there we can see the animation occurring. Now we're getting a little bit of banding. We're limiting the color to only 256, but you can see how we're getting an animation to occur. So that's how we can preview both of those. I'm going to cancel that. We can convert this animation frames down here in the timeline to a video timeline, and it's simple as using the convert tool here, right in the lower left, convert to video timeline. When I click that, you get the video timeline. I'll expand it up here. This is a little bit more complicated because you can see all of the effects and changes that have occurred here. So it's a little bit more in depth than just the simple animation timeline, but some people do like to work in that video timeline instead. And to get back, I just click that same button. It converts, continue, and I'm back to where I was. Under File and Export, we also have a tool down here called Zoomify. Zoomify allows us to post our high-resolution images on the web so viewers can pan and zoom them in more detail. This is a little bit more of a complex technique, but you can see how we can have our output here. We have our image tile options, because what will happen is you'll get slices and it will fall into a table, and your browser options, open in a browser. So Zoomify, you can get more information on that at www.zoomify.com. So that's the beginning to creating and playing basic animation in Photoshop.